Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our budget informational meeting for the 2024-25 budget, or FY25. Thank you for coming tonight. And my name is John Albertini. I'm the superintendent for the Mount Mansfield Unified Union School District. I have been superintendent for 15 years, and I've been in the district as a principal and assistant superintendent for 22. So I have a long relationship with MMU, and really quite grateful to have spent the bulk of my career in the school district. Tonight we're going to go over an overview of the budget for you, give you some budget information, and take any questions that you have. In the presentation, we're gonna go through it, each slide. If you have a question that you really want answered immediately, just raise your hand. And people that are online as well, virtually, if you have a question, please just raise your hand if it's something that you can't wait until the end of the informational presentation, and we'll try to answer it. At the end, we will take questions, any questions that you have about the budget, and hopefully we'll be able to answer them. If we aren't able to answer them tonight, we're going to make sure we take your name, and we'll get back to you with the answer to your question. I think we should be able to tonight, but if we can't, then we'll make sure that we get back to you before April 2nd. Brett, you want to pull up the slides? So we do have Sandra Limoges, a board member. We have Tara Arneson, who's a board member here tonight. And we have some board members that are also virtual. So if you have anything that you want to add, please make sure you let us know, and we will we'll direct any questions to you that you think are appropriate. Okay, so want to go to present mode? Allison Conant's here. Evan Campbell is here. See him? Okay, so we had another informational meeting on March 14th in Richmond, and this is a very, very similar to that presentation. If you go to our website, you'll also find everything that we have done from October to now. I would start the meeting by saying this is certainly in my 25 years working on school budgets, the most challenging that I have experienced. We had a budget that we had worked on for months, and then the legislature changed some of the rules, and it really forced the school district to change the budget, go back and revise it, because the tax implications would have been incredibly significant for the community members. So the district and the finance committee and the board went back, made some significant reductions, and that's what we'll talk about tonight. Brett? So I'd like to start off the meeting a little bit with who we are and what we're about. And a pretty significant initiative across all of our schools is not just the academics, but making sure we're looking at the whole child, and making sure that we are aspiring to ideals of really creating kindness and inclusive educational opportunities for all our students. And so our office is at the Underhill ID building, and this is our kindness superheroes. These are preschoolers that we had a month in February where the whole theme was kindness. And what does that look like for a preschooler? And what does that mean for a preschooler? And it's pretty amazing. My office is literally right in the middle of our two preschools. So I see 3- and 4-year-olds all day long. Sometimes they call me Mr. A, but sometimes they call me Mr. Lamborghini too, which I like. But they're great. When you ask them, what does kindness mean? They can really tell you. When you share with somebody, or you play with somebody outside, or you help somebody that fell down or scraped their knee. or you eat with somebody during lunch. And those are the things we're really trying to instill in students. Academics are critical, obviously, but it's also the whole child. And that's something that we've focused on, a great deal over the last couple of years. And this is a classroom that the first thing you see when you walk in is this classroom runs on kindness. The picture on the first slide was also a kindness challenge in another one of our elementary schools. And when you walk through our schools, what you see are some pretty terrific students that are really, they are an example, I think, of what real kindness is and can be in a very organic and genuine way. And we're trying to reinforce that, on a daily basis, because we know that will make our school system stronger, our community stronger, our state and country, and hopefully our world. Right? So these are some big overarching goals that guide our budget development. So we spent almost 2 years collecting data from all 5 of our towns. We met with all the select boards. We met with parent groups. We met with preschools. We met with a lot of town groups to collect information around, what is important for them in their schools. We also did a huge survey. We collected, I think, 800 and something responses. We collated all that information and we put it into themes. And that has really guided our budget development and a lot of what's going on in our schools. And these are our ends that guide a lot of our budget development. And to distill it for you, it's offering kids really high quality learning programs with diverse tools and programs, so that they can meet their own aspirations in their families, and have the skills and the concepts and the abilities and aptitudes that they need to be successful post high school, whether that's the military, or that's a certification program, or it's a 2-year college or a 4-year college, and at a cost that the community can support. That's one of our biggest goals. Hopefully, you're going to see in some of the presentation as we move forward that I think there's some real objective information that shows we've done a pretty good job of trying to offer a high quality program and control costs. Brett? And these are some of our big priorities for the school district. The first is the social and emotional health of students and staff. So again, the budget, there was a lot of items in there that are really focused on this. Post-COVID, we've seen a lot of students that really have a hard time, regulating their emotions and their feelings and some of their actions as well. And so we put a lot of time and effort and resources into trying to put together, again, the programs and the curriculum and the supports they need so that they can thrive. Our equity work has been ongoing. We have equity coaches. We have a district equity committee that we're trying to take some of what we're learning in those committees and from the coaches and embed them in the schools. Early grades literacy is a very, very significant priority for the school district. We have a lot of resources in the budget, materials and personnel that revolve around that. We have really evolved to the science of reading so that we're following what is best practice, and we're seeing some better results. Multi-tiered systems of support. There's a lot of jargon in here, but that's essentially creating structures and systems so that no student falls through the cracks. Professional learning community, though, that's when teachers and staff are meeting together in a very structured way to look at student data, see where kids are doing really well, where they might need some help, and come up with programs and strategies and teaching techniques to try to meet those needs. And then aligning the curriculum, really working hard to make sure, regardless of where you go to school, that you're getting an equitable resources and an equitable education. Brad? So I really like this picture. The budget is all about students. And really everything revolves around that. This is our graduating class of 2023, a great bunch of students. About 70% of them gone on to either a 2-year college or a 4-year college, with 30% either taking a gap year to try and figure out what they need and want to do, working, or going into the military. But I pause on this because everything that is in the budget revolves around these students. And it's all really about them. And if you go to our schools and you walk around, you'll be able to tell, I think, pretty quickly that we have a lot of dedicated personnel, teachers, staff, who are giving 100% every day, and they're making a big difference. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, this has been an incredibly challenging budget season. I was sharing with some community members at the beginning of the meeting. We're on month 7 in budget development. So it's been a long, complicated, complex budget development season for sure. We had a budget, we had the funding system that we thought was in place. Once we had approved our budget and warned it and got the ballots for it, the rules for the educational funding system changed, and that's when we regrouped and chose to postpone the budget vote, revise the budget, reduce it, and present it in April. So Act H50 was the bill, and Act 84 is the actual law that came into place. And I think this slide is important because it will explain some really critical changes that really have a big influence on the tax rate. So these are school districts right here. Last year, we were under a different pupil weighting and how we count students. And this year we are under a new one, which is the Act 27 weighting system. And so students are weighted differently depending on are they economically disadvantaged, are they English language learners? Those are the big ones. And so if you're a preschooler, you have a different weight. If you're an elementary student, you have a different weight. And if you're a high school student, you have a different weight. And the state has determined that as you go up in the grades, it costs more to educate you. So that's why the weightings are different. So last year, we had, if you look at Mount Mansfield, we had 2.95% of the total student population in Vermont. And these other districts, that was their percentage. And they changed the way that we weight students or determine our pupil count. And under Act 127, our percentage went down, a little under 13%. We were one of the school districts most impacted negatively by the 127. And so what the state originally did is said, we're going to have a 5% tax rate cap. So if you're a district that has lost tax capacity under Act 127, you're going to have a 5% tax rate cap. They changed that. And they said that if you were a district that was disadvantaged by 127, they would take a look at the percentage loss of your pupil count. And for every percentage, they would give you a 1-cent discount. So if you do the math here, they rounded to the nearest whole number, which is about 13%. And so we'll get to a slide later that just shows what the tax rate would have been and what it is with the discount. I'm going to pause there for a minute to see if people have questions. Yes.
Why isn't MMUUSD up there?
I took this as a sample that I took from, this came from the Agency of Education. I didn't make it myself.
Was MMUUSD one of the benefactors?
Yes.
I assume so.
Yeah, yep. This is just a sample to give you like a representative sort of sample of districts. And I actually took this from VT Digger too.
That's great.
So thankfully our enrollment is flat. You know, I'll go to another slide. I think we're down pre-K to 12, 2 students next year. So district our size, that's flat. Now, for many years, we were declining. And so we really have leveled off. So we're no longer seeing a reduction in our pupil count. And that's a good thing because we were continually reacting to different numbers and having to figure out, how we were going to configure things. Really, our numbers are stable right now. And they have been relatively stable for a district our size for the last few years. Can you go to the next slide? Sure. And here's our pre-K to 12 enrollment. We're up a little bit here, but the net is -2 when you look at pre-K to 12. One thing to want to point out is that these are our school-based students, but under Act 166, which is the early ed and childcare, the preschool, we have preschool partnerships as well, that there's a voucher that is set by the state of Vermont that flows through the school system. We contract with qualified private providers. And so there's about 180 preschool vouchers in there as well. These are all our students. And under Act 166, if they're going to a high quality preschool program and they have an agreement with the district, then they can get a voucher for that. So here's a summary of some of the changes from our previously born budget to this budget. And here you'll see total FY25 budget expenditures, education spending. So education spending is, you take your total overall budget and you subtract any non-property tax revenue from that. For us, that's really some small categorical grants, and most of it is IDEA or B, special education is the bulk of it. So this is revenue and some miscellaneous that is not generated through the property tax system or the ed fund. So the money does not come out of the education fund. So that's why you're seeing the differences, and you can see for us that we reduced the budget by $5.5 million. And the result was a 8.38% decrease, almost 10% increase in ed spending, which is a really critical number because that is directly related to your tax rate. And then you can see what the preliminary homestead tax rate was. So that's the tax rate before applying the 5% cap, which I referenced, which was previously 127, and the 13-cent discount, which is the act of, what was that, 84, which changed it from to a cent discount based on the percentage of the overall student population that you lost due to the change in legislation. And then you can see our tax rate.
Which slide are you looking at right now?
This right here. This was that's the discount mechanism that was under.
You can point where you're talking about.
Sure. So discount mechanism, that was the cap and the 13-cent discount. This is the discounted homestead tax rate. So this was in the originally warned budget, and this is in the one that we're presenting to the voters now. It's actually a decrease. And then the change from FY '24, which is that number, in the percent. Okay. Yeah, you might want more.
I grabbed a pen because I'm not as solid. Hopefully I can use this point. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Nicole Fortier. I'm the Director of Finance, so I'll take over on the next few slides. So what we're presenting here are really the main drivers of the increase in the 25 budget from the 24 budget. We added a little bit of money in our capital projects for facilities. We have a few things coming up this year, state mandated stormwater mitigation, radon testing that we have not needed to do in previous years. So that's pretty much where the bulk of that money will be spent. Increase in salaries and wages. This is based on negotiated agreements that were settled in 23, which included 6.5% for teachers and 4.7% for support staff. And it's also important to note that last year the agreements weren't settled at the time of budget. So we had used a 4% placeholder. So there's that small bit that needs to be made up there as well. Health insurance, when we saw a 12.5% increase last year, we thought that was significant. So when we saw 16.4% this year, we were surprised. So a small decrease in debt service, as we continue to pay our debt down year after year, we see a slight reprieve there. And then the other is just increases in inflationary related costs, increased cost of school bus, technology, tech-related contracts, and then just our insurance, other insurance costs, general liability, property, etc. Go to the next one. So this is a 3-year comparison. This is the total expenditure budget. We'll see ed spending separately, and John just talked about the difference in total budget and ed spending, which is outside of the non-property tax revenue sources. But this is just a 3-year comparison model of that. You can go to the next. And then again, education spending. So the portion of the budget that is really the starting point of the calculation of the homestead tax rate. Go to the next one. So this one is good. This is a 4-year education tax rate comparison. So this is pre-CLA. Let's keep that in mind. So if we look at 23 and 24, it's important to note that those are a big decrease in those 2 years, largely due to a surplus in the ed fund. And surplus money in the ed fund will drive up the yield. And if any of this is a little bit confusing, don't worry, we'll get into it probably at the next slide. But as the yield goes up, that's significantly beneficial to the homestead tax rate. So these 2 years here saw an inflated yield because of that surplus in the ed fund, which we aren't seeing in 25 in the yield for 25. But I think it's still important to note that even with not having that benefit of the surplus in the ed fund, the rate in 25 is still lower. I mean, pretty significantly lower than the rate that we saw in 22. Personnel additions. So in the past couple of years, we have received some COVID relief funding that's called ESSER funds. And we are, these are 2 positions, 2 behavioral support interventionist positions that were previously that were previously ESSER funded that we determined are still a great need in the district. So those are the 2 additions to the budget this year, personnel-wise. We like to put up a slide just to show you how we plan on spending the capital money that goes into the budget every year. And again, I had mentioned a couple slides back that we had put a little bit extra money in the capital into our capital investments this year, a good portion of which is being spent on the stormwater. So at Mount Mansfield, Richmond Elementary, and Camels Hump Middle School, we have to do some stormwater mitigation, and that is put upon us by the state. So some work, some dehumidification work here at the high school, freezers at the middle school, some playground updates across the board. And I'll just note specifically the playground updates. Our insurance provider comes out every year and does an assessment. So a lot of that playground work are things that they tell us for safety reasons need to be updated. Go to the next one, sorry. Okay, there's a lot here, so we'll just take it piece by piece. And if you have questions, please raise a hand. So as John has been talking a bit about, let's look at the second line from the top there. So what's referred to as estimated long-term weighted ADM. In previous years, you would have heard that referred to as equalized pupils. So that is the change. And initially it might look a little bit confusing because you see that number going up. But it's important to keep in mind that while you're seeing that long-term weighted number go up, it's going up across the board, across the state. And as John has mentioned already, we have lost out on a share of those pupils across the state. So while we're seeing that number jump up, what's really important to focus on is 4 lines down is the yield number. And so that was what I had talked about a couple slides ago, that when you have a surplus in the ed fund, that number can be inflated any given year. That number is really driven by district spend across the state. So what other districts as a whole in the state are doing with their budgets, their need, their draw from the ed fund is really what drives that number. So that's why we're seeing that go down so significantly this year. And then John had mentioned also, so this preliminary homestead tax rate here, this is what our tax rate calculated out to in fiscal year 25 before that 13-cent reduction. And so this is now the 1.2579 or 1.26 is how we calculate the tax rate for 25.
Can you explain that a little more, please?
Say that again?
Can you explain that better?
This number here, how we get down to this number?
Yes.
Okay, sure. So the way that the formula really works is we start at the very top with our education spending. So that's our entire budget. And then we take out the non-property tax revenue sources. So we're saying essentially that 49,838,416 is what our district will receive from the education fund. Then that number gets divided by the number of long-term weighted pupils essentially in our district. So that's the 3675. So our education spending per pupil is pretty much what we're saying. It costs us $13,558 to educate one pupil. So then you have the property yield from the state, and that's based on all of the needs from all the districts collectively in the state. That is the number that the Vermont Department of Taxes, the AOE, has said that they will allocate essentially per pupil. So the difference is what's needed to be made up by the homestead tax rate. So we divide those two numbers, the 9 and the 13, and that's how we get the spending adjustment. That's multiplied by the dollar, and that's how we come up with our tax rate. And then initial tax rate, and then that is further reduced by our 13% reduction in related to Act 127. Is that, it's very confusing, I understand, and I live and breathe this every day, so it makes a little bit more sense to me, but don't worry, it's still confusing. So I'm happy to go through any other questions anyone has.
So the estimated long-term weighted is that the change between 24 and 25 is the result of the new act.
The new weighting system, yes, exactly. as a district that, you know, for example, might have lower weights in English language learners or socioeconomically disadvantaged students. That's where we lost out on a little bit of net share as compared to some other districts.
And then in the past, the educational spending per pupil, Mount Mansfield District, if I recall, was pretty reasonable compared to other districts. And I'm just wondering what, are there other things maybe that you posted these times, but what is that relative to other districts like in the states or CBA?
Yeah, so I see a few of you are holding the flyer. We didn't include this specifically in this slideshow here, but in that flyer on the second page, there's a chart that shows Mount Mansfield ed spending per pupil versus other districts, and we are the third lowest, I think, compared to all the districts in Chittenden County.
Okay, this is on my refrigerator.
Yeah.
And one of the, Winooski was a school district that really benefited. So some school districts, their enrollment or their weighting doubled compared to what it was.
Thank you for
Thank you.
making that point. I think so. This, you'll notice this was the other chart in the flyer next to the ed spending per pupil, and we wanted to update this for purposes of this presentation because you'll notice the 3 school districts there that have stars next to them. Those are school districts that have already gone out to vote. Their votes have failed and they are going back for a revote. So you'll notice on this chart, this is homestead tax rate by district, and you'll note that Mount Mansfield is the second lowest in Chittenden County and lower than the state average at $1.36. And why we wanted to revisit this is because I think it's important to note that still maintaining, you know, a spot of the second lowest after 3 of the districts on this chart. This is the second tax rate that they're presenting to, you know, this is their next best that they're presenting to their constituents. So, and just the estimated state tax is was provided to us by the Vermont Tax Commissioner. So if there were any questions about where that rate came from. Question? Okay. Now let's get into CLA. So I guess I'll just start really high level for anybody who does not know what CLA is, how CLA is determined. If you do, I'm sorry if this is redundant. So CLA is really a measure of, for tax purposes, of how your home value relates to fair market value. So here are the CLA levels for all 5 of our towns. A CLA of 100% means that you have a property that is valued at fair market value. And the goal of CLA is really to make sure that all properties are being taxed at their fair market value. We've seen a lot of real estate activity in the last few years, so that's what is significantly driving some of the CLAs that you see here. And it's also important to note that in blue, under each of these towns' names, that is when those towns were last reappraised. So for Jericho or for Huntington, you know, there's quite a gap between 100% and the CLA of those respective towns, and that's because they are due and have been due for reappraisal for a few years now. So essentially what we do is take the homestead tax rate that we went through in depth 2 slides ago, the tax rate that the district calculates, and we apply the CLA percentage against it. And so that's what comes, this is the tax rate with CLA, this column here. So we've been getting a lot of questions from the community, like, I live in this town, you know, how can I really determine what my tax rate is going to be? And I would suggest focusing on this last column here. So we all have a pretty good idea of what our home value is. And so this is the dollar change per 100,000. So if you have a $300,000 home, you can, take that column times 3, or if you have a $500,000 home, you extrapolate that over 5. Another way to do it is to take the CLA percentage here. Let's just say you're a homeowner in Jericho, and that's your tax rate right there, the 1.7201, and you have a $400,000 home. You can take that rate and multiply it by 4,000. If you have a $300,000 home, you take that rate and multiply it by 3,000. Helpful. CLA is quite confusing, and it's a big driver in the tax rate this year. So if anyone has questions or you want a better explanation on anything presented here, please don't hesitate to again.
I just have a question. So we're looking at Jericho 2016. Was that the historical last figure to your far right, or is that what we'll be paying for 100,000 coming up in our tax bills?
Per 100,000, that is what the tax rate will go up.
So we will look at the 2016. In my mind, it's a distortion. We're looking at a number that doesn't. All right, so the bottom, the very last number in that column will show by per 100,000.
Mm-hmm.
So we go houses work, but
Yeah,
if we go, I'm sorry, I said something.
it's okay. The 244.67. Yes,
So times that's what we expected today. We won't guess on the budget.
correct.
Okay.
And I will just add in the caveat that, if we're using the best information, the most up-to-date information from the AOE and the Vermont Department of Taxes that is available right now. If, based on the number of districts whose votes failed, if those districts go and they pull money out of their budget, and that's less that the ed fund is needing to support, we're hopeful that the yield will go up, and then that in turn is beneficial to tax rates. But we have to present now the most up-to-date information that we have. Kevin?
Just for clarification, that last column is the change from last year.
Correct.
Right, so that would be in addition
Correct.
to what you paid, or reduction to what was paid last year.
Mm-hmm. Correct. Yeah. And you made a note about the 2016. So just to reiterate here, I think it's 80%. When CLA falls between 80%, that town is required to be reappraised. I know for certain the last 2 years, Jericho has been below that number. So we are due and waiting for, I say that as a Jericho resident myself, we are due and awaiting reappraisal.
So we can anticipate a much higher amount once the reappraisal is done. Is that fair to say?
Your home value will go up, and then the CLA will drop. So there is a little bit of a wash there. Not any type.
I attended the last meeting.
Yeah.
So just to make sure I'm absolutely clear, the last number, we're looking at Jericho. So I'm paying X amount right now in taxes. So per 100,000, my taxes will go up.
$244.67.
Whatever.
Yes, yes.
3, 4, 5, whatever they keep saying.
Right.
You're touching it. Substantial increase, is that blank?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sensitive to how impactful these numbers are to people, myself included. Again, I'm a Jericho resident. I'll just make a note because this went out, I believe, and if it wasn't in the flyer, then it was part of our previous budget presentations throughout the year. Of that 244.67 per 100,000 that our taxes will be going up, $51 of that is due to the increase in the schools. Our budget is driving $51 of that. The rest is because of the need to adjust home values in our towns to fair market value.
Again, I appreciate your patience with me, but
Yeah.
we pay it this way going forward, and there's no reform at the state level. I mean, are we essentially putting, good money to waste, if you will? I mean, we're not, if you don't fix it at the state level, will this just keep spiraling up the next few years? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I would say there has to be, and I shared this with folks at the beginning of the meeting, there has to be some really fundamental structural changes to the education funding system. We're literally working with the hand that we have been dealt. I think when you take a look at our tax rate comparatively, you can see that there's been some really thoughtful spending and planning over the last decade plus to try to moderate the tax rate comparatively. However, what you spend in Canaan, you pay for in Jericho. So part of what happens with the CLA is some of that money is distributed out and in the form of that yield. So the education funding system is a shared somewhat system in Vermont. So that has an impact. What somebody spends next door, neighboring town, neighboring district has an impact on us as well.
To your point, I'll just share that I think John would agree that any opportunity any of us have to provide feedback and to confirm that there needs to be change, we take those opportunities. And
What would it take to make a change, some changes at the state level?
in my opinion, I think Act 127 and how difficult this budget year was, the legislators heard a lot of really good feedback. I mean, I think John testified, superintendents from almost every district testified about some of the challenges that we're up against.
Yeah, and the changes have to come legislatively. Fundamentally, and I know they had a meeting today with the House Ed and House Ways and Means talking about really making some significant changes to the education funding system.
Yeah, I'll just add, I'm Kevin on the school board. This year is significant for all of the school districts because how we're weighting our students is just completely different from how we did it last year. In some towns are having to pay more, some we're paying more. That's gonna, so that we're just counting students differently next year, the year after. It's all, so it's not gonna spiral out of control, next year because this is our adjustment year to get on the new way in which we're weighting students. The state did give us a bump. So over the next 5 years, we have that discount. This year it's 13 cents. I think next year 11.9 goes down, and we kind of taper to the point where we're no longer adjusting to the new weights. So
How do we know that that's going to be true?
sorry.
How do we know that that would happen?
Oh, well, the discount is in the law. I mean, it was signed by the governor, and that's there until they decide to change it again. But we have that to understand. What Montpelier does is they do change the funding formula very often. Right? I've been working on school budgets for 12 years. The only constant, and the thing that we look forward to, not in a positive way, so what's different this year? What do we have to deal with this year to try to figure out how to explain it to our community? And I think we're going to continue to see a lot of that as the state tries to figure out how to control the pressures on the budgets.
Okay, so I'm trying to track this. Getting back to the 13% discount that we got, that goes away with time, correct?
Yeah, so over 5 years, we start at 13 cents and it decreases 20% each year until.
Okay, so then had we not had the 13 cent discount, that would mean that, we were talking about Jericho, of course, we keep on with the 244 number, that would have added $130 to that number.
Not doing that quick math in my head, but yes, that number would go up.
Okay, so getting back to the earlier question, then, this is the shock period, if you will, of the adjustment, but there still is the unwinding of that 13% as well. So, yeah.
And our community went through that last time of the merger. We had a very similar buffer. This was modeled after how mergers happened, where we had a 10% or 10-cent discount and 8 cents. Deal with that. So we're, and as a board, we're familiar with what that means. Every year, we have to either figure out how to absorb or add that to the next year's budget. It's the gift that keeps on giving.
Anything else on CLA before we move forward? Yeah.
When you talk about the tax on homesteads, what is the effect on the portion of your tax bill that does not relate to the homestead? Let's just say the homestead is the house and 2 acres, but you may have 20 acres. What's the effect on the portion that's not covered by the homestead? Is it the same percentage?
I would assume that would be the non-homestead tax rate. I have assumed that would be the non-homestead tax rate. If it's not calculated in your property tax bill.
No, it's in the property tax bill, but it's homestead's got certain benefits associated with it with respect to your adjusted gross income and stuff. That is not, and you asked for feedback from Montpelier. This is a ludicrous process. Everybody that's in it, without connecting the logical decision points to the people that are actually making the decisions. So the timing is off. On one hand, Montpelier, we're putting restrictions on our businesses and while at the same time, somebody outside and want to buy something that we have, which inflates the apparent value. But there's no guarantees that those values will be there if or when we ever choose to sell. More importantly, if we're not selling what somebody else's ideas of what our property is.
The town
I think it's Edie, maybe. one.
Edie, did you want to say something?
Sure.
Is there 2 things going on?
Yeah, there's some.
There's some feedback from online, so apologies.
So if we give feedback, trying to align the schedule of events, and I'll just go, I think I heard you say you have a 13% increase in health insurance costs.
16,
16?
yes,
I
16,
apologize.
over 16.
16.4.
So, and how much per employee is the health insurance costs?
Depends what plan they're in. We have a number of different plans. Are you talking total cost or?
Well, just take, for example, is it $8,000 a year? Is it $10,000 a year?
For a family plan, I would say 25.
25,000? Okay. So you have a $25,000 factor with a 16% increase. Now, a big portion of the health insurance cost is the malpractice liability that burdens all of the providers. So we've got a 16% increase in a very significant element that you people have absolutely no control. In the private sector, because we're trying to sell a product, if I have a 16% increase in one category, I might have to reduce salaries in the other because we can't make money from somewhere else. People either buy the product and give us the money for the product, but we just can't pass through whatever our increases are. And so this process is a frustration for those of us. And what we see is people in Montpelier are generating significant burdens to the function of our lives and our governance without taking into consideration any of the ancillary impacts. And then all of a sudden we end up at a meeting like this, and people that are my age are sitting there saying, not going to be able to pay this bill, particularly given that it's not even deductible at the federal level. Because as soon as you hit 10,000, you've now lost the deductibility of property taxes. And it's really easy at Jericho to get $10,000 for property taxes, et cetera, et cetera. So that somehow, some way, those people are determining how to hit you folks with all this stuff. Need to hear that they need to stop attempting to be social engineers of an extremely complicated process without applying the same social engineering to every other component. And I'll give you an example. A group of people in South Burlington, when they wanted to build buildings, now this is a growth industry that's paying people really well and doing all the things. People in South Burlington said, oh, you can't build that building there because we don't want to see the park. So fortunately, the airport and stuff rearranged everything. But when you put it all together, we are driving the businesses and the employees and our young people out of the state of Vermont because our social engineering in Montpelier is defeating the provision of housing that would actually be available to people with children, which would increase the utilization rate in the schools. So I just suggest, I see Vermont heading in the direction where you're only going to have trust funders or people who have made money someplace else that are going to be able to. And that's pretty sad.
Yeah.
When our children say to us, even if you give us the land, Dad, we can't afford to live here. And 28% of a building that we build is the cost of the bureaucracy. And that's if you don't have any fees. So I don't think there's much that you guys can do, but you can feed back that we are killing the goose that lays the golden eggs by the way we approach the subject.
Thank you. Next.
And so we just wanted to provide a little, a slide on, the income sensitivity tax rate, so the credit. So about 70% of Vermont households receive a property tax credit. And the credit is applied to the following year's bills. I believe, I'm still waiting for updated numbers. I believe the limit, the household income limit is 128,000. So if your household income is $128,000 or lower, we've linked, if you can get into the slideshow, you can access it from our website. There's a property tax credit calculator here. I will say that this is the calculator from last year. They, being the state, has not yet updated it for this year, but the steps are going to be largely the same. So for anybody who, and we're not going to go through the levels, the layers of the property tax credit, but just know if you're at that household income level, you are eligible for a property tax credit, and recommend that you.
If I may, just a quick question again, I'm looking at the property tax credit bill. So, for example, just rough number, my taxes now are going to go up, say, $800, $1,000, maybe more. We, as a retired person, that's pretty substantial. I think it would be for many people substantial.
Mm-hmm.
So when you state this, all well and good that there is a rebate program, but if I'm paying roughly, say, $1,200 more taxes, the state, because of my income, they give me say we're going to like $400 rebate or deduction, whatever you want to call it, I'm still paying over $800 more in taxes. So it's a little bit of a shell game, if you will. I mean, I guess the bottom line is I support schools. My wife's a retired teacher. I have no problem with the school board or local people. I have a huge problem with Montpelier. And again, if we keep feeding into the system, if we say yes, we're just crippling ourselves. And as the gentleman pointed out, affordability. We talk about rising prices. Our children, we can't afford houses here in Vermont. My 3 children are all out of the state. They can't afford to come back here. My wife and I came back here probably a dozen years ago, and now we're hanging on and stuff like that. However, but there are no taxes going down. I guess my point is that we keep feeding a broken system. What good are we really doing? We're really actually harming our children because we're making it less affordable by making not only homes more expensive, but we're putting taxes through the roof that they'll never be able to pay. So I support schools. It's a tough situation, but unless the message is received in Montpelier and changes have to be made, we're just feeding into a gigantic broken system. That's my viewpoint. I appreciate this.
Thank you. Other questions?
A couple people online who wanted to say something.
See anybody?
I haven't seen anybody.
If anybody does online, please raise your hand. We'll get to you.
How do you get the cost per pupil? So we're at 13,000 or so.
Yep.
According to the flyer. But when I just kind of do the quick numbers, 2,600 students against I guess the education spend budget seems like it's higher.
The 49 million.
2 types of pupils that you would divide by, either the weighted pupils, which not every pupil is counted the same way. And those added up to the.
That's the 3,000.
Yeah, it's the 3675.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Students in the bill, are much lower.
Yeah.
You want the actual cost, the average cost of educating our actual pupils. It's probably not. It's probably closer to 20.
And that's low in Vermont, below the average quite a bit. Yeah.
I don't know if this is a time to ask this question, but on page 29, the regular salaries are going up by 11.9%. It says primarily due to a 6.5% negotiated agreement. How do you go from 3.5 in the negotiated agreement to 11.9?
Can you tell me what section specifically you're looking at, or are you looking at in total? Okay, so as I said a little bit number of slides ago, so that's the 6%, 6.5% for teachers. It's 4.7% for support staff. And last year at the time of budget, we didn't have the negotiated agreement settled. So we used a 4% placeholder. So that's another 2.5% that is being made up there.
Up to 11.9.
So there are new hires, people that left, people that came.
I have to ask, if the population, so the population is steady, why are we having new hires?
Well, people go and we hire new people. They might be higher on the salary schedule than somebody that has left. That includes support staff, bus drivers. In addition to that, we also have people that will, on our salary schedule, that can do, they can move a column, which creates a more of an increase for them. And that is driving the budget.
If they, oh, sorry.
Yeah, so we have at a certain education level, you can move a column and you get a bigger increase.
If you have anyone moving a column in any given year and moving a step based on how long they've been there, an additional increase.
So that 6.5, who's getting just 6.5? Everyone moves down a step with another year, here.
Sir,
The 6.5 would be on the base, right?
The 6.5 is of new money. So it's new money that's spread right throughout throughout the salary schedule.
You're
And
not
it's-
saying everybody's getting a 6.5% raise, you're saying total expenditures for
That's right.
salaries.
Year over year, it's a 6.5% increase in the total salary. And then so really, we had to make up, it was 9% is the actual increase because we had budgeted last year for 4%. And a lot less than that for support staff.
Yeah, I'm just looking at general instruction programs here.
Yep, but we do have some support staff in there.
yes.
But we haven't added, the only two positions that we have added, which are those behavioral support positions or behavioral interventionists that were funded by ESSER, and we desperately need those to support students.
Sorry, if you had another question.
Okay,
Okay. So on page 2, under the school board directory, these are policies listed as clerk. And then at the end, John Milazzo says.
we have two clerks.
All right.
So we have
Who's different?
yep, they're two different. One is an elected position. That's John Milazzo.
Okay.
You'll see that on your ballot, April 2nd. Please, everybody vote. And we also have a clerk for the school board. And there's certain duties that they have to do. If we don't have a minute taker, they would do that. There's certain documents based on statutory regulations that they would sign. And then John's primary job is to oversee the voting.
Okay. I have just a quick easy question, it's not even strictly related to the budget, but one of the indicators of quality of Mount Mansfield is the number of AP classes. Has the number of AP classes, are they trending down or enrollment, or are we still offering?
Yeah, we're still offering all the AP courses.
Art sciences, we have AP classes?
Yep. Yes.
All right, thank you.
We have about, I think 70% of the students take at least one AP course.
Do you mind going to the chat? I see that there were some questions in the chat and I just want to make sure that they're answered appropriately. One of the questions that I did see come through said, what happens next if the budget is voted no? So if you want to speak.
Yeah, we'll have to go back and revise the budget, consider revising the budget. We do that with our finance committee and with the board. It would take an awful, I'll be totally honest, it's gonna, to make a big substantial dent in the tax rate, it would mean a lot of teacher reductions, support staff reductions. And if honestly, and I've shared this at all the community, we need every single person that we have in our buildings right now to meet the needs of students. Our class sizes are not small. They're above the state average. And we need everybody that we have in our buildings to, help meet the needs of students.
There's a hand raised. Emily?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So I'm a teacher in another district whose budget failed, and I just kind of want to send the reality home about how much would need to be cut to make a dent in the rate. Okay, because I'm doing the numbers with the people in my building on a daily basis. Basically in my district, if you take all the teachers that are employed by our district, this is just teachers, not staff. There are 56 pages of teachers, about 8 to 12 teachers per page. In order, just looking at bodies, in order to actually make a dent, if our next budget doesn't pass, that number of teachers in the district would have to be basically cut in half. And that's to make a teeny tiny dent in the district. So what's happening is our budget failed the first round and 42 people have lost their jobs. That includes sports and the arts across the buildings, different support staff, educational coaches, 19 para educators. And I'm sharing this with you so you kind of understand. So, you know, I feel like we were just getting to a really great point post-COVID, and now this has happened, and it's really, really hard. I'm not gonna lie or mince words. And people are just like, people are scared. Librarians, other really like valuable resources in our district. And so because of the way the budgets have to be warned and people have to get their contracts and such, more teachers are actually probably going to get RIFs before the budget's even resolved and possibly rehired. RIF means reduction in force. So I'm just wanting to share this with you because this is really about people. This is about kids, really about kids. It's about people who really love what they do and really want to serve our communities and our kids. It is a systemic problem that is unfortunately like the perfect storm this year. And I just really want to emphasize that part of it, that these are your community members who are dedicating their lives in their school, and it's your kids and our future. Is it messed up right now? 100%. But sending a message to Montpelier on the backs of the kids and us is really it's really hard right now, especially coming out of the pandemic and working with kids who as John just said earlier, are still really needing all of these supports. So thank you.
Thank you.
I can't access the chat, and I think Brett was having issues too. So if anybody had a question and feels like they didn't get a response or still has a question, please feel free to raise your hand. Joanna?
Hi. Yes, I do have a question. Kind of want to follow up on what was just said about failed budget means we have to cut staff, we have to cut teachers. Is that the only way really where we can reduce this budget? Because I feel like there's still some other opportunities. And I'm wondering, like, have we audited some of the stuff outside of the, actually reducing force? Like, what have been done to do that? Because this is a very, very tough, for the school, for the kids, but also for the families in our community. And that increase in rate maybe doesn't feel like it's significant, but it is. And it really weighs on the families. So I want to, before I go and vote yes or no, but before I vote, I want to understand, what did we do to really come up with this is necessity? And if some of those increases maybe we can hold off with.
The bulk of about 80% of the budget is personnel. We have to maintain our facilities, make sure that they're safe. And there's a lot of state regulations and federal around that. And plus we need to do it. And we go, line by line on budgets to say, is this something we need or we don't need? But the way that you're going to bring down the budget is personnel. And not just teachers, support staff, administration, we would look at everything. But we have a pretty lean, bench in a lot of areas. We did a analysis a few years ago, and we had the lowest admin to student ratio in the county. So, we don't have a big central office. We don't have a lot of central office administrators, and we don't have a bunch of administration in the buildings either. We've tried to really, and have for many years, invest in classrooms and teachers and students, consistently.
I'll just add, one of the first things the school district does when a budget passes is they start signing contracts with employees. And so when you don't pass a budget, you're not signing contracts with employees. Those employees don't have a contract, you may not be able to retain them until you have that budget passed. And so that's the challenge you have, is trying to retain your talent while you don't have any money to sign those contracts against, because you can't sign a contract until you have a commitment from the community that the budget's going to pass. That's the biggest risk, I think, to our community. When you think about what's going to happen if we vote the budget down, is we run the risk of not being able to retain our talent.
Yeah, the workforce environment has really, really changed. So it's the pool of applicants and the competition between districts is like I have never seen it. And this is my 33rd year in public education. So retaining really good people is probably the most important thing that we can do, because when you look at the research, it's the quality of the teacher and the people in the buildings that make the biggest difference for the success of students.
There was a question that came into the chat. Jack Bromley asked, is it true that if the budget fails, districts can borrow up to 87% of their last passed budget to pay for operations?
Yes, I mean, that's what you would do. If you need to, you would borrow up to 87%, but you can't just borrow 87%. You have to keep voting on a budget. You can't just say we're going to take 87% of this year's budget. You got to keep voting on a budget. So that's something that has come up with quite a few times. So if the budget fails, we have to come back with another budget. If after July 1 or even before that, we don't have a passed budget, we can borrow as a bridge 87% of this year's budget, which, obviously I'm an optimistic, very positive person. If anybody knows me, that I think they would tell you that. It would be catastrophic. It would be really bad. So this is a tough year, though. I've shared that in the beginning. Unprecedented this budget season has been. And I would share with you, the changes need to come from Montpelier. Really fundamental structural changes need to come to the ed funding system.
And if I could just opine on this for a little bit. It's not as simple as if there was a different way to distribute the revenue. It has to do with expenses. And we have, I think of the analogy of all these little mom and pop stores that had butcher shops in them years ago, and all little tiny towns all over the state, and hardware sections just like Nesso's used to. You can't maintain this standard in 251 towns and just keep shelling out money. I'm speaking as a former educational administrator. Those small schools are very, very expensive to the heart of each of those communities. But if you really want to start tackling expenditures, and I'd be hoisted by the petard for saying this, those little towns are really expensive to those kids, because all those kids deserve the same level of service as a South Burlington and as a Mount Mansfield kid. So we can, every couple of years, there's new formulas about how to spread the same money around. But the expenses is really what, it's just nuts. Oh, by the way, the kids are worth every nickel. But having said that, I just don't see the political will to do that. I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, I will tell you this, and Edie Granning, who's our representative, is on or was on, but we testified for 2 committees before 127 was passed. And we said, this has the potential to incentivize inefficiencies. Because what happens is you subsidize very, very small class sizes and, under capacity schools, and it costs everybody more money.
I'll say one last thing though. The governor, who's immensely popular because he's the guy who's trying to put the brakes on this vehicle all the time. And then we have people, when he did a state of the state message, other people who represent the other side of the aisle that I usually vote for, moderate Democrat, proud of it, smirking at this guy, who's the only guy in that room who wants to say, let's talk about revenue. Let's talk a little bit about businesses. You know, it can't all just be about social engineering. I say this as a proud moderate Democrat who wants to work with moderate Republicans. But Jesus, we need to spend a little more time thinking about how we're going to increase revenue and how we're going to keep costs down. It blows my mind that he's sitting up there and behind him, you got Zuckerman smirking like he knows better. Well, the reason 80% of the state supports this guy, Phil Scott, is because he's the one who's trying to put the brakes on. I just wish there was a little more balance in the legend. And I got to go because I'm getting ahead of myself here, but it's just like, you know, it's about what our expenses are and not all these programs which are very expensive and all wonderful, but yikes. So I don't have a whole lot of faith that there's going to be a new system, a new distribution thing in another 5 or 10 years. It's just the same amount of money and waiting kids. But unless you figure out a way to make more money come in, we're in the same pickle. Anyway, thank you for letting me explore.
Okay.
It just drives me funky.
Are there any, thank you. Are there any more questions from virtually? Okay, we're going to take one more or two, as many as we need to, but what if you haven't gone yet, sir?
Could you talk a little about the $5 million that came out of the initial proposed budget is not in this budget?
That was facilities. And we had done, this was post-COVID, we had a pretty big analysis by ECI. So our buildings are 50, 60 years old, and some of the systems are original. Now they work, and they've been well maintained, but they're at the end of their useful life, many of them. And we had this analysis, and it said, you know, you're really going to need to update your air exchange, your heating systems, you know, soon. And those were the investments that were in the budget.
Yeah, so the needs didn't go away.
Right.
We saw an opportunity to fund them. And, you know, I think a lot of us thought like this isn't going to happen this easily, but you kind of had to do, well, not really try, but it's like you didn't. They wouldn't have reformed. And so it did make sense at the time, and I think it resulted in a better approach. But at some point in the next, I would say 5 years, if the state also doesn't decide how to help school districts with capital projects through grants or some other way, our district will need to bond for a major upgrade. You keep seeing our debt going down, because we haven't bonded for 15 years.
Around there, yep, pretty close to there. And in 2007, just to build a little bit off that, the state sunsetted construction aid for decades and decades and decades and decades. You got 30 or 40, well, that's maybe too many, but for several decades, or a few. There was construction aid, so you'd get 30 or 40% that was paid by the state, and so it didn't all come on to property taxes. And now you've seen a lot of bonds fail across the state, not because they, you know, were frivolous or unnecessary, but because all the impact goes on the property tax. And for many, many years, there was aid that would help cushion that, and we haven't seen that since 2007.
And just like, was that 6 million, I know now down to 500,000, was that originally put into the capital project budget when there was the 5% tax cap?
Yes, yep.
So you thought that, so, but now that got changed or repealed, it's no longer 5% tax cap that came out.
Yeah, the result would have been like, it's tough now, it would have been super duper duper tough, but it was an opportunity that, you know, the district and the board felt would be really good for the community. All right,
On the issue of capital funding and expenses, I think one of the critical components that I've observed is prudent and logical things which would reduce future costs or mitigate deterioration are postponed because of the immediate cash impact, because people avoid bonding. Bonding is taking the actual expense and matching it to the useful life of the benefit. So let's just say that we want to do some good things here, like put in the geothermal system, which is very capital intensive. But when you're drawing 55-degree water out of the ground to cool the building when it's gotten really warm, that's a lot cheaper than running an electrical air conditioner. But if that capital expense is bonded over the useful life of the geothermal system, which let's say is 40 years, instead of the current year being adversely impacted with the full cost of the expense, it's amortized over the 40-year useful life. And the bond rate, if it's targeted, you follow the bond market. When the rates are down like they were 4 years ago, they were substantially lower than they are now. You can end up identifying your approved capital projects, showing how they actually reduce either the expenses of the education or significantly enhance the result of the education. Like sitting here tonight, trying to hear what's being said and looking at that screen. These screens were obsolete 10 years ago. We go to town meetings and we've got better resolution at home on a $500 65-inch television set. And so as a taxpayer and a citizen, I'd like to encourage us getting really smart in how we make our decisions following a logical model that says, what do we need to do? What's the best way to do it? How should it be financed? Who can we get the lowest cost capital from? And then how can we employ it? And I think technology offers a phenomenal opportunity to flatten the future expenses and significantly improve the educational product. I was on a 6-person meeting today. One was in Providence, one was in Boston, one was in Plattsburgh, etc. And none of us traveled. But because of the quality of the screens, it was as if we were all sitting on one another's laps. Now, just imagine you got a fabulous professor speaking in Los Angeles, California, and you've got that technology here. The kids here can listen to that person in California. And I think it's called the Young University. They're literally taking super people and they're distributing that education with interactivity into rural areas. And I just think that we could do something really significant, ground up, that would really enhance it. So I'm just encouraging enlightened, technologically focused capital with financing budgets so that we don't end up in this bind all the time, because I don't think it's going to come out of a failure.
Well, we're going to see a bond in the next few years, so hopefully people will vote for it because we're going to need it. Thank you. I want to thank everybody for coming today. This is a really good discussion. It's great that we can have like very civil discourse. Probably not everybody agrees, but I just have really appreciate everybody coming and the level of respect and civility. So have a great night and please vote on April 2nd.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Thank you. Thank you all for attending.